The gunshot echoed through the dusty street of Rawhide, Nevada, silencing the usual afternoon bustle as Catherine Adams crumpled to the ground, her blue calico dress blooming crimson just below her right shoulder. The year was 1876, and in this unforgiving corner of the West, a woman's refusal could cost her everything. Elijah Wright had witnessed it all from the doorway of the general store. The way that snake Thomas Holloway had cornered Catherine outside the millinery, his whiskey breath visible in his leering smile. The way Catherine had stood her ground, chin raised despite her evident fear. And then the flash of Holloway's revolver when she tried to walk away. "You'll regret turning me down, Miss Adams," Holloway had shouted, the pistol still smoking in his hand as he staggered backward, seemingly surprised by his own violence. Elijah didn't think. He just moved. His long legs carried him across the street as townspeople scattered. By the time he reached Catherine, Holloway had disappeared down an alley, a coward fleeing his crime. "Miss Adams," Elijah said, kneeling beside her. Blood seeped between her fingers where she clutched her shoulder, her face ashen with shock. "Help me," she whispered, eyes wide with pain and fear. Elijah glanced around frantically. "Someone fetch the doctor." An older man stepped forward, hat in hand. "Doc Miller left for Carson City this morning, won't be back for days." Elijah's stomach dropped. "What about Sheriff Porter?" "Gone after them rustlers up north," called a woman from the gathering crowd. Catherine's breathing grew labored, her eyelids fluttering. Elijah knew he couldn't wait. The nearest doctor would be in Silver Creek, a good 20 miles east. "Hold on, Miss Adams," he said, carefully lifting her into his arms. She weighed hardly anything, like a bird with broken wings. "I'm taking you to get help." As he carried her toward the livery stable, Catherine's eyes found his, glazed with pain but surprisingly lucid. "Why are you helping me, Mr. Wright?" she whispered. "You hardly know me." Elijah adjusted his hold, trying not to jostle her wound. "Because it's the right thing to do, madam, and because no decent man walks away when a lady's in trouble." What he didn't say was how he'd noticed her every Sunday at church, since she'd arrived in Rawhide 3 months ago to take over her late aunt's dressmaking shop. He didn't mention how he'd tipped his hat to her each morning as she opened her store across from his small cattle operation office, or how he'd admired her determined spirit in a town that wasn't always kind to independent women. The livery owner, Sam Tucker, jumped to attention when Elijah burst through the doors. "Good Lord, what happened?" Sam exclaimed, rushing forward. "Holloway shot Miss Adams. I need my fastest horse, Sam. She needs a doctor and fast." Sam didn't waste time asking questions. He let out Thunderbolt, Elijah's sturdy palomino, already saddled from earlier that day. "She'll never make it sitting upright," Sam warned. "I'll carry her the whole way if I have to," Elijah replied, his jaw set in determination. With Sam's help, he mounted the horse while cradling Catherine against his chest. She'd fallen quiet, her breathing shallow, eyes closed. The front of Elijah's shirt was already soaked with her blood. "I'll send word to Silver Creek that you're coming," Sam promised. "And I'll tell Sheriff Porter what happened when he returns." Elijah nodded grimly. "If Holloway shows his face again, make sure he doesn't leave town." The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Elijah guided Thunderbolt onto the eastern trail. 20 miles of rough terrain lay ahead, and a woman's life hung in the balance. He adjusted Catherine in his arms, trying to keep pressure on her wound while maintaining a pace that wouldn't jostle her too badly. "Stay with me, Miss Adams," he murmured, unsure if she could hear him. "I've got you." As Rawhide disappeared behind them, Elijah realized this might be the most important journey of his 32 years. He'd fought in skirmishes, rounded up cattle in blizzards, and survived a Comanche attack, but never had another person's life depended so completely on his strength and determination. The trail stretched endlessly before them, and Elijah Wright rode as if the very devil himself were in pursuit. Catherine drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of searing pain and the steady rhythm of hoofbeats beneath her. Sometimes she would open her eyes to see rugged terrain passing, the golden light of late afternoon painting the sagebrush and distant mountains. Other times she registered only the solid warmth of the man who held her, his heartbeat against her ear when her head rested against his chest. "Mr. Wright," she murmured once when clarity briefly returned, his grip tightened slightly. "I'm here, Miss Adams. We're making good time." "If I don't talk like that," he interrupted, his voice firm. "You're going to be fine. Just rest and save your strength." She wanted to argue but couldn't find the energy. Instead, she studied his face from beneath heavy eyelids, the strong, square jaw darkened with stubble, deep-set brown eyes focused intently on the trail ahead, and the worry lines creasing his sun-bronzed forehead. Elijah Wright wasn't what most would consider handsome in the conventional sense, but there was something undeniably compelling about his face, a steadiness that Catherine found herself clinging to as waves of pain threatened to pull her under. She'd noticed him around town, of course. Rawhide wasn't large enough for residents to remain strangers for long. She knew he ran a modest cattle operation, that he was respected by the townspeople, and that unlike many of the single men in the area, he never caused trouble at the saloon. But they'd exchanged little more than polite greetings in the 3 months since she'd arrived to claim her inheritance, her Aunt Martha's dress shop and the small rooms above it. "Why did Holloway shoot you?" Elijah asked suddenly, breaking her reverie. Catherine winced as they jostled over a rough patch of trail. He's been coming into the shop, making suggestions. Today he waited outside, said he'd been patient long enough." Her voice faltered. "When I refused him again, he grabbed me. I slapped him. Then, the gun." Elijah's jaw tightened visibly. "That coward. Sheriff Porter will see him hang for this." "If I survive to testify," Catherine whispered. "You will," Elijah said with such conviction that for a moment she believed him. The sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the trail. Elijah knew they needed to make more progress before nightfall. The desert cooled quickly after sunset, and Catherine's condition would only worsen if she became chilled. "Miss Adams, I need to pick up the pace," he warned. "It might hurt more, but we need to reach Silver Creek before dark if possible." Catherine nodded weakly against his chest. "Do what you must, Mr. Wright." He clicked his tongue and Thunderbolt responded, increasing to a canter that made Catherine bite her lip to keep from crying out. Elijah felt her tense and wished he could spare her the pain, but the darkening stain on her dress told him time was running short. After another mile, he felt her go limp in his arms. "Miss Adams," panic edged his voice. "Catherine." There was no response, but he could still feel the shallow rise and fall of her breathing. She'd passed out, perhaps a blessing given the painful journey, but a worrying sign nonetheless. Elijah pushed Thunderbolt harder, the horse's powerful muscles bunching and extending beneath them. The trail narrowed as it began winding through foothills dotted with juniper and scrub pine. He'd traveled this route many times, but never with such precious cargo, never with the weight of a life literally in his arms. As the light faded from the sky, Elijah's world narrowed to 3 things: the trail ahead, the woman in his arms, and the increasingly desperate prayer repeating in his mind. "Please God, don't let her die. Not when I've only just found her." The thought startled him with its intensity and presumption. Catherine Adams wasn't his to find or lose. She was a fellow townsperson in need, nothing more. Yet something about her quiet dignity in the face of pain, the trust with which she'd surrendered herself to his care, had awakened feelings he'd long thought dormant after years of solitary living. 2 hours later, with twilight deepening to full darkness, Elijah spotted the distant lights of Silver Creek. Thunderbolt was lathered with sweat, sides heaving, but the loyal horse responded when Elijah asked for one final effort. "Almost there, girl," he encouraged the horse, shifting Catherine's weight slightly to free one hand to pat Thunderbolt's neck. "Almost there." The town materialized out of the darkness, first just scattered pinpricks of light, then the shadowy outlines of buildings. Silver Creek was larger than Rawhide, a proper mining town with boardwalks and a 2-story hotel. More importantly, it had a real doctor with a proper office, not just the part-time barber who doubled as a medical man in Rawhide when Doc Miller was away. Elijah rode directly to the doctor's house at the edge of town, marked by the small sign reading Dr. James Abernathy, physician and surgeon. Light shone through the front windows, a promising sign. "Hello, the house," Elijah called as he carefully dismounted, still cradling Catherine. "Doctor." "We need help." The door opened almost immediately, revealing a middle-aged man with spectacles and thinning hair. He took in the scene with one practiced glance. "Bring her in," he said, stepping aside. "What happened?" "Gunshot wound to the shoulder," Elijah explained, carrying Catherine through to a back room that served as an examination area. "About 4 hours ago in Rawhide. She's lost a lot of blood." Dr. Abernathy was already rolling up his sleeves. "Put her on the table. Martha." He called, and a plump woman appeared from another room. "We have an emergency. Prepare for surgery." Elijah gently laid Catherine on the table, reluctant to relinquish his hold on her. Her face was deathly pale, lips tinged blue. "Is she going to make it?" he asked, voice rough with fear and exhaustion. Dr. Abernathy was already cutting away the blood-soaked fabric of Catherine's dress. "I won't lie to you, it's serious. But you did right bringing her here so quickly. Few men could have made that journey in the time you did." "She's strong," Elijah said, as much to himself as to the doctor. "Stronger than she looks." "That helps," the doctor agreed. "Now, sir, you'll have to wait outside while we work." Martha, presumably the doctor's wife, began ushering Elijah toward the door. "I'll bring you some coffee, young man. You look about dead on your feet yourself." Elijah wanted to protest, to stay by Catherine's side, but he knew he would only be in the way. At the doorway, he turned back for one last look. Catherine's chestnut hair was spread across the table, her face ghostly in the lamplight. She looked so vulnerable that it physically hurt him to leave her. "Fight, Miss Adams," he whispered. "Please fight." Then the door closed, and Elijah Wright was left alone with his prayers and the longest wait of his life. Martha brought coffee as promised, and later some stew that Elijah barely tasted. The house clock ticked away the minutes that stretched into hours. Twice, Elijah went outside to check on Thunderbolt, who'd been tied to the hitching post. The second time, a young stable boy appeared, sent by Martha to take the exhausted horse to the livery for food, water, and rest. Shortly after midnight, the surgery room door finally opened. Dr. Abernathy emerged, wiping his hands on a towel. His shirt sleeves were rolled up and spots of blood stained his vest. Elijah jumped to his feet, heart pounding. "She's alive," the doctor said before Elijah could speak. "The bullet missed her lung by less than an inch, but did considerable damage to muscle and tissue. I've removed it and cleaned the wound as best I can." "Will she recover fully?" Elijah asked. Dr. Abernathy's expression turned grave. "If infection doesn't set in, yes, but that's a significant if. The next 48 hours are critical. She's young and appears healthy, which is in her favor." Relief left Elijah light-headed. He sank back into his chair. "Thank you, doctor." "Don't thank me yet," the older man cautioned. "And I should be thanking you. Not many would have undertaken such a journey for someone else. You likely saved her life by bringing her here so quickly." Elijah shook his head. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Dr. Abernathy said simply. "They wouldn't have. Now you look exhausted yourself. Martha has prepared a cot in the room next to Miss Adams. I suggest you get some rest." "I'd prefer to sit with her if that's all right," Elijah said. The doctor studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. Martha has cleaned her up and dressed her in a nightgown. You can go in now, but I expect you to get some rest tomorrow. You'll be no good to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion." Elijah nodded gratefully and entered the small room where Catherine lay. In the soft lamplight, she looked impossibly fragile, her skin nearly as white as the bandages visible at the neck of her borrowed nightgown. A chair had been placed beside the bed, and Elijah lowered himself into it, his aching muscles protesting after the long ride. For a long time, he simply watched the rise and fall of her chest, reassuring himself with each breath she took. Eventually, exhaustion overcame him, and he drifted into an uneasy sleep, his large hand resting near hers on the edge of the bed. He woke with a start when Catherine stirred and moaned softly. Dawn light filtered through the curtains, suggesting he'd slept for several hours. Catherine's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then clearing as they fell on him. "Mr. Wright," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're still here." Elijah leaned forward. "Of course I am. How are you feeling?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of buffalo," she attempted a weak smile. "But alive, thanks to you." "The doctor did the hard part," Elijah demurred. Catherine's hand moved slightly toward his. "You carried me 20 miles to get to him. I remember parts of it." Elijah gently took her hand in his, marveling at how small and delicate it felt. "I'm just glad we made it in time." "Water?" she asked, and he helped her take a few sips from the glass on the bedside table. The simple movement seemed to exhaust her. "You should rest," he said, settling her back against the pillows. Catherine's eyes were already closing, but her fingers tightened slightly around his. "Don't leave," she murmured. "I won't," Elijah promised, and he meant it in ways that surprised even himself. "Doctor." Abernathy entered shortly after, nodding with approval when he saw Catherine had awakened and spoken. He examined her wound, changed the bandages, and pronounced himself cautiously optimistic. "No signs of infection yet," he told Elijah after Catherine had drifted back to sleep. "Her fever is mild, which is encouraging. She's not out of danger, but things look better than I expected." "How long until she can travel back to Rawhide?" Elijah asked. The doctor gave him a sharp look. "Not for at least 2 weeks, possibly longer. And even then, it would need to be in a wagon with proper bedding, not on horseback." Elijah nodded, already calculating. He needed to send word to Sam Tucker in Rawhide about Catherine's condition, and he should check if Sheriff Porter had returned and apprehended Holloway. His cattle operation needed attention too. He'd left his foreman, Miguel, in charge. But there were decisions only Elijah could make. Yet the thought of leaving Catherine alone in Silver Creek, with no family or friends to care for her during her recovery, seemed impossible. "Is there a telegraph office in town?" he asked. "Yes, down by the Mercantile," Dr. Abernathy replied. "You should get some fresh air and a proper meal, young man. Miss Adams will likely sleep most of the day, and Martha will sit with her." Elijah reluctantly agreed. He needed to make arrangements if he was going to stay in Silver Creek until Catherine was well enough to travel. The next week passed in a blur of worry and gradual hope. Catherine's recovery was slow but steady, each day bringing a little more color to her cheeks and strength to her voice. Elijah divided his time between her bedside and handling his business affairs via telegraph. He sent messages to his foreman with detailed instructions, and to Sheriff Porter, who confirmed that Thomas Holloway had been captured trying to flee to California and was now in the Rawhide jail awaiting trial. He also rented a small room above the Silver Creek Hotel, though he spent most nights dozing in the chair beside Catherine's bed, only returning to his room to change clothes and bathe. Catherine protested this arrangement when she was lucid enough to notice. "Mr. Wright, you cannot keep sleeping in that chair. You'll cripple yourself." "I've slept in worse conditions on cattle drives," he assured her. "That's hardly a recommendation," she said with a weak smile. "And please, after all this, I think you might call me Catherine." "Only if you'll call me Elijah," he countered, pleased by the small concession. As Catherine grew stronger, they began to truly talk, filling the quiet hours with conversation that ranged from their childhoods to their hopes for the future. Elijah learned that Catherine had grown up in St. Louis, the daughter of a bookbinder. She'd learned dressmaking from her mother and had come west after both parents died of influenza, leaving her alone except for her Aunt Martha in Rawhide. "When Aunt Martha passed last winter, I inherited her shop," Catherine explained. "I'd never been west of the Mississippi before coming to Rawhide, but I couldn't bear to sell the only connection I had left to family." "Were you happy there, before?" Elijah gestured vaguely toward her injured shoulder. Catherine considered this. "Content, perhaps, not unhappy. The work keeps me busy, and most people in town have been welcoming, but it's lonely sometimes." She looked away. "I never expected to find myself alone at 26. "I understand loneliness," Elijah said quietly. "After my parents died, I drifted for years before settling in Rawhide. Built my ranch from nothing. It's a good life, but solitary." "You have no family at all?" Catherine asked. Elijah shook his head. "A cousin back east I haven't seen in 15 years, that's all." Catherine studied him thoughtfully. "Yet you risked everything for a woman you barely knew." "Not everything," Elijah corrected. "And perhaps I knew enough." Their eyes held for a long moment before Catherine looked away, a flush coloring her pale cheeks. Something was growing between them in that sickroom, a connection neither had anticipated but neither could deny. By the end of the second week, Dr. Abernathy allowed Catherine to sit up for longer periods and even take short, supported walks around the room. The wound was healing well, though she would always carry a scar as a reminder of her brush with death. "You're making remarkable progress, Miss Adams," Dr. Abernathy told her during one examination. "Another week, and we might consider discussing your return to Rawhide if suitable transportation and care can be arranged." After the doctor left, Catherine turned worried eyes to Elijah. "I don't know how I'll manage the shop while recovering, and the thought of returning to face Thomas Holloway at his trial." She shuddered. "You won't face him alone," Elijah promised. "And as for the shop, perhaps you could hire help temporarily," Catherine sighed. "With what money?" "I've barely been breaking even, and now there's Dr. Abernathy's bill to consider." "Don't worry about the doctor's bill," Elijah said. Catherine's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" Elijah shifted uncomfortably under her scrutiny. "I've taken care of it." "You did what?" Catherine struggled to sit up straighter, wincing as the movement pulled at her healing wound. "Elijah Wright, I cannot allow you to pay my medical expenses. You've done far too much already." "It's done," he said simply. "Consider it a loan if your pride demands it, but I won't hear arguments on this matter." Catherine looked as if she wanted to continue objecting, but exhaustion won out. She settled back against her pillows, frustration evident in the set of her mouth. "I'm not a charity case," she said finally. "I never thought you were," Elijah replied. "But sometimes even the strongest people need help." Later that evening, when Catherine was sleeping peacefully, Elijah stepped outside for some fresh air. The night was clear, stars glittering overhead in a way that always made him feel small yet connected to something greater than himself. Martha found him there, gazing skyward. "She's special to you, isn't she?" the older woman asked without preamble. Elijah considered denying it, then decided honesty was simpler. "Yes, though I hardly know why. We barely spoke before this happened." Martha smiled knowingly. "Some connections don't need time or words. James and I knew within a day of meeting that we'd spend our lives together." She patted his arm. "She feels the same, you know. I see it in the way she watches you when you're not looking." Before Elijah could respond, Martha continued, "James says she can travel in another week if she continues improving." "What will you do then, Mr. Wright?" It was a question Elijah had been asking himself with increasing frequency. His business in Rawhide needed him, but the thought of being separated from Catherine, especially while she was still recovering, was becoming increasingly intolerable. "I haven't decided," he admitted. "It depends on what Miss Adams wants." Martha's eyes twinkled. "Sometimes what we want and what we need are at odds, Mr. Wright, but I suspect in this case they might align perfectly." 3 days later, Catherine was strong enough to sit in a chair by the window, watching the activity on Silver Creek's Main Street. Elijah had gone to send some telegrams and check on arrangements for their eventual return journey to Rawhide. The door opened, and Catherine expected to see Martha with the promised cup of tea. Instead, a smartly dressed woman with blonde hair arranged in an elaborate style entered the room. "Miss Adams, I'm Eugenia Palmer. I hope I'm not intruding." Her cultured voice carried a slight Eastern accent. Catherine straightened in her chair, conscious of her simple nightgown and loose hair. "Not at all, though I'm afraid you have me at a disadvantage, Mrs. Palmer." "Miss Palmer," the woman corrected with a tight smile. "I've recently arrived in Silver Creek to visit my cousin, who happens to be married to the bank manager." Imagine my surprise when I learned that Elijah Wright was in town, attending to an injured dressmaker. Catherine's confusion must have shown on her face because Miss Palmer continued, "Perhaps he hasn't mentioned me. Elijah and I were quite close in Virginia City 2 years ago before his business called him to Rawhide." An uncomfortable feeling settled in Catherine's stomach. "Mr. Wright's personal affairs are none of my concern, Miss Palmer." The blonde laughed lightly. "How noble of you to say so, but we both know that's not quite true. The whole town is talking about how he's barely left your side these past weeks." She leaned closer. "I simply thought you should know that Elijah has a habit of playing the hero. 2 years ago, he rescued me from a runaway carriage. His gallantry was irresistible." Catherine kept her expression neutral despite the hurt blooming in her chest. "Thank you for your concern, but as I said, Mr. Wright's past is his own business. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm still recovering and tire easily." Miss Palmer straightened, adjusting her gloves. "Of course. I just thought you deserved to know what you're dealing with." Elijah Wright may seem steadfast, but once the excitement of rescue fades. She shrugged eloquently. "Well, I wish you a speedy recovery, Miss Adams." After she left, Catherine remained by the window, but her gaze was turned inward now. Had she misinterpreted Elijah's attention? Was his care merely the same gallantry he would show any damsel in distress, destined to wane once the crisis passed? When Elijah returned an hour later, Catherine was quiet, responding to his cheerful news about travel arrangements with polite disinterest. "Is everything all right?" he asked, concern furrowing his brow. "Are you feeling unwell?" Catherine forced a smile. "Just tired. Dr. Abernathy says that's to be expected. Elijah didn't look convinced but didn't press the issue. I've arranged for a wagon with a proper mattress for our journey back to Rawhide. We can leave whenever Dr. Abernathy gives his approval. That's very kind, Catherine said. Though I've been thinking perhaps you should return ahead of me. You've been away from your business for so long already. Elijah looked startled. I'm not leaving you to travel alone. I wouldn't be alone. Dr. Abernathy mentioned his nephew could drive me when I'm ready. She avoided his eyes. You've already done far more than could be expected, Mr. Wright. The formal address didn't escape his notice. Catherine, what's happened? This morning you seemed. Have I offended you somehow? Not at all, she said quickly. I'm simply being practical. Your life in Rawhide can't remain on hold indefinitely for a woman who was merely in the wrong place at the wrong time. Elijah knelt before her chair, trying to catch her downcast gaze. Is that what you think you are to me? An obligation? A responsibility I took on out of some sense of duty? When Catherine didn't answer, he continued, his voice low and urgent. These weeks have been difficult, yes, but they've also given me something I didn't know I was missing. Getting to know you, Catherine Adams, your courage, your humor, your determination has been the greatest privilege. Catherine finally met his eyes, her own swimming with unshed tears. I had a visitor today. Miss Eugenia Palmer said you were acquainted in Virginia City. Understanding dawned on Elijah's face, followed quickly by exasperation. Eugenia Palmer, good Lord, that was nothing a brief flirtation 2 years ago that she apparently interpreted as more significant than it was. She said you rescued her too, Catherine persisted. From a startled horse that barely qualified as runaway, Elijah clarified. Catherine, whatever Eugenia implied, I assure you it bears no resemblance to how I feel about you. And how do you feel? The question slipped out before Catherine could reconsider. Elijah took her hands in his expression more serious than she'd ever seen it. I feel like a man who walked through life half asleep until the moment I held you in my arms on that desperate ride to Silver Creek. I feel like everything before was preparation for finding you. I feel. He paused, swallowing hard. I feel like I'm falling in love with you, Catherine Adams, and it terrifies and exhilarates me in equal measure. Catherine's heart seemed to stop, then restart at double pace. Elijah, you don't have to say anything, he assured her quickly. I know this is sudden, and you're still recovering, and there's the matter of Holloway's trial when we return to Rawhide. But I needed you to know that my care for you has nothing to do with obligation, and everything to do with the woman you are. Tears spilled down Catherine's cheeks. I thought perhaps I was imagining this connection between us. Or worse, that I was confusing gratitude with deeper feelings. And now, Elijah asked, hope evident in his voice. Catherine freed one hand to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Now I think perhaps we've been given a rare gift, a beginning that neither of us expected but both of us needed. Elijah turned his face to press a kiss to her palm. When you're stronger, when we're back in Rawhide and you've had time to be sure of your feelings, we'll talk about what comes next. But know this, Catherine Adams, whatever happens, you will never face it alone again. The next week brought rapid improvements in Catherine's condition. Dr. Abernathy pronounced himself satisfied with her recovery and approved their planned journey back to Rawhide, provided they traveled slowly and stopped frequently for Catherine to rest. The morning of their departure dawned clear and mild, perfect traveling weather. Catherine, dressed in a simple blue dress Martha had altered to accommodate her still healing shoulder, sat nervously on the edge of her bed while Martha helped arrange her hair. You look lovely, dear, Martha assured her. No one would guess you've been confined to a sick for nearly a month. Catherine touched her cheek, still paler than normal but no longer the alarming white it had been. "I can never thank you and Dr. Abernathy enough for your care. Seeing you recovered is thanks enough," Martha said warmly. "Though I must say, watching your romance with Mr. Wright blossom has been an unexpected pleasure. It's not often we get to witness the beginning of something so promising." Catherine blushed. "We're taking things slowly. There's still so much we don't know about each other." "Poppycock," Martha declared, securing the last hairpin. "James and I knew within days, as I told Mr. Wright. When it's right, it's right. Everything else is just details to be worked out along the way." Before Catherine could respond, there was a knock at the door. Elijah entered, hat in hand, looking more formally dressed than she'd seen him during their time in Silver Creek. "The wagon is ready whenever you are," he said, his eyes warming as they took in Catherine. "You look beautiful." "Thank you," she said, suddenly shy despite the deepening intimacy between them over the past week. They had yet to share more than the touch of hands and one gentle kiss to her forehead, both acutely aware of her healing body and the eyes of their hosts. Dr. Abernathy entered behind Elijah, carrying a small package. "Medicine for the journey, Miss Adams. Instructions are included. Mr. Wright knows how to change your bandages now, but I expect you to see your local doctor immediately upon your return to Rawhide." "I will," Catherine promised, accepting the package. With final thanks and goodbyes to the Abernathys, Elijah helped Catherine into the wagon he'd arranged. True to his word, he'd outfitted it with a proper mattress and pillows, creating a comfortable nest where Catherine could recline during the journey. "It's a 2-day trip at the pace we'll need to take," Elijah explained as he climbed up to the driver's seat. "We'll stop tonight at Jenkins Way Station. It's not fancy, but Mrs. Jenkins keeps a clean place and sets a good table." Catherine settled against the pillows, still marveling at the care Elijah had taken in every detail of their journey. "I'm in your capable hands, Mr. Wright." The road to Rawhide was considerably smoother than the trail Elijah had taken during their desperate ride to Silver Creek. Even so, he drove carefully, avoiding ruts and rocks that might jostle his precious passenger. They stopped frequently for Catherine to stretch her legs, and for both to take refreshment from the basket of food Martha had prepared. At one such stop, they sat together on a fallen log, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. "Are you nervous about returning to Rawhide?" Elijah asked, offering Catherine a slice of apple. She accepted it, considering the question. "Yes and no. I'm anxious about facing Thomas Holloway at the trial, of course, but mostly I'm concerned about what comes next." "With the shop, you mean?" Catherine nodded. "And with us." In Silver Creek, we were in our own little world. In Rawhide, there will be gossip, expectations, your business, my shop. "Real life," Elijah summarized. "It won't be easy, Catherine. I won't pretend otherwise. But if there's one thing I've learned from ranching, it's that anything worth having requires work and patience." Catherine smiled at the comparison. "And am I worth having, Mr. Wright?" "More than all the cattle in Nevada territory," he replied without hesitation, his serious tone belied by the twinkle in his eyes. "That night at Jenkins Way Station, Mrs. Jenkins fussed over Catherine like a mother hen, insisting on serving her extra helpings of stew and the choicest pieces of her famous apple pie. She also gave Catherine the best bedroom, regaling her with stories of the area while helping her prepare for bed. "That Mr. Wright of yours is a good man," Mrs. Jenkins declared as she turned down the covers. "My Harold always said you can judge a man by how he treats those weaker than himself. The way Mr. Wright fusses over you speaks volumes." "He's not my Mr. Wright," Catherine felt compelled to point out, though the words rang hollow even to her own ears. Mrs. Jenkins merely smiled knowingly. "If you say so, dearie. But I've seen the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching, and the way you look back." Catherine fell asleep that night with Mrs. Jenkins' words echoing in her mind, a small smile on her lips despite the ache in her healing shoulder. The second day of travel brought them within sight of Rawhide by late afternoon. Catherine felt a complex mix of emotions as the familiar outline of the town appeared on the horizon, relief at returning to her own space, anxiety about facing the memories of that terrible day, and a strange sense of loss as her time alone with Elijah drew to a close. As if sensing her thoughts, Elijah reached back to touch her hand. "It'll be all right, Catherine. We'll face whatever comes together." The main street was quiet as they drove into town, but heads turned and whispers followed their progress. News traveled fast in places like Rawhide, and everyone would know about Thomas Holloway's attack and Elijah's heroic rescue. They stopped first at the sheriff's office, where Sheriff Porter greeted them with evident relief. "Miss Adams, it does my heart good to see you recovered," he said, tipping his hat. "I was beginning to worry we'd have to postpone Holloway's trial." "When is it scheduled?" Elijah asked, his hand protectively at Catherine's elbow. "3 days from now," Sheriff Porter replied. "Judge Wheeler arrived yesterday from Carson City. He's staying over at the hotel." He glanced at Catherine. "Are you up to testifying, Miss Adams? The trial can't proceed without your account." Catherine straightened her spine. "I'll be ready, Sheriff." "That man needs to face justice for what he did." The sheriff nodded approvingly. "That's the spirit. Meanwhile, he's secure in my jail, and the town's been mighty cold toward his few friends since word got out about his cowardly attack." They left the sheriff's office and continued to Catherine's shop and home. The sign above the door, "Adams Dressmaking and Alterations," was a welcome sight after so many weeks away. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes at this tangible connection to her aunt and the life she'd been building in Rawhide. Elijah helped her down from the wagon, then collected her small bag of belongings. "Let me check inside first," he suggested, and Catherine nodded, suddenly nervous about re-entering the space where her ordinary life had been so violently disrupted. To her surprise, when Elijah opened the door, the shop was spotless and filled with the scent of fresh baked bread. A vase of wildflowers sat on the counter, and a fire crackled cheerfully in the small stove. "What on earth?" Catherine murmured, stepping inside. "Welcome home, Miss Adams." The greeting came from Mrs. Torres, the baker's wife, who emerged from the back room wiping her hands on an apron. "We've been taking turns keeping your place tidy and aired out while you were away." Catherine was speechless with gratitude. Mrs. Torres continued, "There's a hot meal waiting upstairs and fresh linens on the bed. The ladies' auxiliary thought you might appreciate some comforts after your ordeal." I don't know what to say," Catherine managed finally. "Thank you seems inadequate." Mrs. Torres waved away her thanks. "This town takes care of its own, Miss Adams. What that snake Holloway did doesn't represent Rawhide. This does." She gestured to the prepared home. "Now you should rest. Doctor's orders, I'm sure." After Mrs. Torres departed, Catherine turned to Elijah, overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness. "I had no idea. Small towns can surprise you," he said with a smile. "For all their faults, when one of their own is hurt, they rally around." Catherine reached for his hand. "Will you stay? For supper, I mean. I don't think I can eat all that Mrs. Torres prepared by myself." Elijah hesitated. "Are you sure? People will talk." "People already are talking," Catherine pointed out. "Besides, after everything we've been through, a shared meal hardly seems scandalous." He smiled then, squeezing her hand. "In that case, I'd be honored, but first, let me see to the wagon and horse." "I'll be back shortly." After Elijah left, Catherine slowly climbed the stairs to her living quarters above the shop. As promised, everything was immaculate, with a covered dish keeping warm by the stove and fresh flowers on the small dining table. The familiar surroundings both comforted and disoriented her. Everything looked the same. Yet she herself had changed so profoundly since last setting foot in these rooms. When Elijah returned, they shared the meal. Mrs. Torres had prepared a hearty stew with fresh bread and apple tart for dessert. Conversation flowed easily between them, as it had in Silver Creek, but now with the added dimension of discussing the future that stretched before them in Rawhide. "I've been thinking," Elijah said as they finished their meal, "about your shop and your concerns about managing during your recovery." Catherine set down her teacup. "Oh, my sister-in-law in Sacramento has a daughter, Abigail, who's quite skilled with a needle. She's 18 and eager to learn a proper trade. I thought perhaps she might come to assist you, at least until you're fully recovered." He quickly added, "Only if you're amenable, of course. Your sister-in-law. I thought you had no family nearby," Catherine said, confused. "My late brother's wife," Elijah clarified. "We're not close, but we correspond occasionally. When I telegraphed about your situation, she mentioned that Abigail had been hoping to find placement with a dressmaker." Catherine considered the suggestion. "It would be helpful to have assistance, especially with the larger orders, but I couldn't afford to pay much, especially at first." Melanie, my sister-in-law, suggested room and board plus a small stipend would be sufficient. Abigail needs experience more than income at this stage. "It's a generous offer," Catherine acknowledged, "and thoughtful of you to arrange it." Elijah looked somewhat embarrassed. "I hope I haven't overstepped. I just want to make things easier for you without interfering with your independence." Catherine reached across the table to touch his hand. "You haven't overstepped. It's a perfect solution, actually." Their eyes met and held, the small table suddenly feeling very intimate in the lamplight. Elijah turned his hand to clasp hers. "Catherine, I meant what I said in Silver Creek. My feelings for you are real and growing stronger each day. But I understand if you need time, especially with the trial ahead and your recovery still ongoing." Catherine felt a surge of affection for this man who consistently put her needs before his own desires. "I don't need time to know how I feel, Elijah. What I need is courage to embrace it despite all the uncertainties ahead." "You're the bravest person I know," he said softly. She smiled at that. "Not always, but I'm learning." Elijah stood then, reluctance evident in his movements. "I should go." "You need rest, and tomorrow will bring enough challenges." Catherine rose as well, walking with him to the door. "Will you come by in the morning? Perhaps we could have breakfast together before meeting with Sheriff Porter to discuss the trial." "I'll be here," he promised. At the threshold, he paused, then bent to place a gentle kiss on her cheek. "Sweet dreams, Catherine." The next few days passed in a whirlwind of preparation for Thomas Holloway's trial. Catherine met with Sheriff Porter to review her testimony, reconnected with customers who expressed delight at her return, and continued to regain her strength with each passing day. Elijah was a constant presence, dividing his time between his ranch responsibilities and Catherine's side. Each evening, he would join her for supper, their relationship deepening through quiet conversations about hopes, dreams, and the shared future that seemed increasingly inevitable. The morning of the trial dawned bright and clear. Catherine dressed with particular care in a high-necked navy blue dress that conveyed both dignity and seriousness. Her hands trembled slightly as she pinned up her hair, anxious about facing Thomas Holloway for the first time since the shooting. A knock at the door downstairs announced Elijah's arrival. He too was formally dressed, his usually unruly brown hair slicked back and his beard neatly trimmed. His eyes widened appreciatively at the sight of her. "You look beautiful," he said, "and strong, ready for this." Catherine took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." The courtroom normally, the town hall, was packed when they arrived. It seemed all of Rawhide had turned out to witness justice being served. Catherine kept her gaze straight ahead as Elijah escorted her to her seat, refusing to look toward the table where Thomas Holloway sat with his attorney. Judge Wheeler, a stern-looking man with impressive white side whiskers, called the court to order. The proceedings began with the prosecutor outlining the charges against Holloway: attempted murder and aggravated assault. When Catherine was called to testify, Elijah squeezed her hand encouragingly before she made her way to the witness stand. Only then did she allow herself to look at Thomas Holloway. The man who had nearly ended her life slouched in his chair, his once handsome face now haggard from weeks in jail. When their eyes met, he had the audacity to wink at her. Catherine's resolve hardened. In a clear, steady voice, she recounted the events leading up to the shooting, Holloway's unwanted attentions, his escalating behavior, and finally his violent response to her rejection. She described the pain of the gunshot, the terror of believing she might die, and Elijah's heroic rescue. "And there is no doubt in your mind that Mr. Holloway shot you deliberately after you refused his advances?" the prosecutor asked. "None whatsoever," Catherine replied firmly. "He said, 'You'll regret turning me down, Miss Adams,' as I lay bleeding on the ground." When Holloway's attorney attempted to suggest that Catherine had somehow led his client on, the muttering in the courtroom grew so hostile that Judge Wheeler had to call for order. The questioning was brief after that, the defense seemingly aware that they were fighting a losing battle. Elijah's testimony followed, corroborating Catherine's account and describing the desperate ride to Silver Creek. Dr. Abernathy had provided a written statement about the severity of Catherine's wound, which the prosecutor read aloud. By mid-afternoon, the evidence was overwhelming. Judge Wheeler took little time to deliberate before pronouncing Thomas Holloway guilty on all charges. "Thomas Holloway, you have been found guilty of the attempted murder of Miss Catherine Adams, a heinous crime motivated by nothing more than wounded pride and a sense of entitlement to a woman who had every right to refuse your attentions. Such behavior has no place in civilized society." The judge's voice was stern as he continued, "I hereby sentence you to 15 years in Nevada State Prison." A collective sigh of relief swept through the courtroom. Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes, not from sadness, but from the sheer release of tension that had been building for weeks. It was over. Justice had been served. As Holloway was led away in chains, he glared at Catherine with naked hatred. "This isn't over," he spat. Sheriff Porter cuffed him roughly on the shoulder. "That's enough out of you. It's plenty over for the next 15 years. Outside the courthouse, townspeople gathered around Catherine and Elijah, offering congratulations and support. Catherine was touched by the outpouring of goodwill, but the emotional toll of the day was catching up with her. Noticing her fatigue, Elijah politely but firmly dispersed the well-wishers and escorted her home. "You were magnificent today," he told her as they walked slowly back to her shop. "I'm so proud of you, Catherine." She leaned against him slightly, grateful for his solid presence. "I couldn't have done it without knowing you were there, when Holloway threatened me even after being sentenced." She shuddered. "He can't hurt you anymore," Elijah assured her. "He's going to prison for a long time, and even after that, I promise you'll never have to face him alone." At her door, Catherine turned to him, suddenly unwilling to be separated even for the night. "Would you stay for dinner? I know you must have ranch business, nothing that can't wait," Elijah interrupted. "I'd be honored to stay." That evening, as they sat by the fire after their meal, Catherine felt a deep sense of peace settling over her. The trial was behind them, her recovery progressing well, and beside her sat a man whose steadfast care had evolved into something precious and profound. "What are you thinking about?" Elijah asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "The future," she replied honestly. "My shop, your ranch, us." Elijah set down his coffee cup and turned to face her fully. "I've been thinking about the future too, a lot." Something in his tone made Catherine's heart quicken. "Oh." "Catherine, when I carried you to Silver Creek that day, I was terrified you wouldn't survive. The thought of losing you before I'd even had a chance to truly know you was unbearable." His voice roughened with emotion. "These past weeks have been the most meaningful of my life, despite the circumstances that brought them about." "For me too," Catherine whispered. Elijah took her hands in his. "I know it hasn't been long by conventional standards. Some might say we're rushing. But I've never been more certain of anything than I am of my feelings for you." Catherine's breath caught as Elijah slid from his chair to one knee before her. "Catherine Adams, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? I promise to cherish and protect you all the days of my life, to support your dreams as fervently as my own, and to thank God every day for bringing you into my life even through such difficult circumstances." Tears filled Catherine's eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, Elijah Wright, I will marry you." His face broke into a smile of such radiant happiness that Catherine felt her heart might burst. Rising from his knee, he pulled her gently into his arms and kissed her their first true kiss, tender yet filled with promise. When they parted, Elijah reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "It was my mother's," he explained as he removed a delicate gold ring set with a small pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "If it doesn't suit, we can choose another. It's perfect," Catherine interrupted as he slipped it onto her finger. "Absolutely perfect." News of their engagement spread through Rawhide like wildfire. Most townspeople expressed delight, though a few raised eyebrows at the relatively short courtship. Elijah and Catherine paid little mind to the gossips, focusing instead on their plans for the future. They decided on a small wedding in 6 weeks' time, long enough for Catherine to fully recover and for Elijah's niece, Abigail, to arrive from Sacramento to help with the dress shop. It would also allow time for them to prepare living arrangements. "I've been thinking," Elijah said one evening as they walked arm in arm through town. "My ranch house is comfortable but small, and it's a 3-mile ride from town. Not ideal for your business." Catherine nodded. The question of where they would live after marriage had been on her mind as well. "I've been wondering about that too. The rooms above the shop are cozy for one, but would be quite cramped for two. And Abigail will need a place to stay as well." "What if we built something new?" Elijah suggested. "There's that vacant lot at the edge of town near the crossroads. Close enough that you could easily walk to your shop, but with space for a proper house and garden. Maybe even room to expand the shop itself someday." Catherine looked up at him, touched by his consideration. "You'd be willing to leave your ranch house?" "The ranch will still be there," Elijah pointed out. "I spend half my time in town anyway, and Miguel handles most of the day-to-day operations already. This way, we could create a home that suits us both, not just my bachelor quarters or your spinster lodgings." Catherine laughed at his blunt description. "When you put it that way, a fresh start sounds perfect." She squeezed his arm. "But what about the cost? Building a new house while maintaining 2 properties?" "Catherine," Elijah said patiently, "the cattle business has been good to me. I've been saving for years with no family to support. Let me do this for us, for our future family." The mention of a family brought a blush to Catherine's cheeks. It was a subject they danced around but not discussed directly. "You want children?" she asked softly. "Very much," Elijah admitted. "If you do, that is." "I do," Catherine confirmed, her heart full. "I'd given up hope of having a family of my own before you came into my life." The next few weeks flew by in a flurry of preparations. Elijah purchased the vacant lot and contracted the town's best builders to begin construction on their new home. Catherine divided her time between designing her wedding dress, gradually resuming work in her shop, and planning their future living space. Abigail Wright arrived from Sacramento 2 weeks before the wedding, a bright, eager young woman with a natural talent for dressmaking that delighted Catherine. The two women formed an immediate bond, with Abigail bringing fresh energy and ideas to the shop, while Catherine provided the expertise and guidance the younger woman craved. "You're a natural teacher," Elijah observed one evening after watching Catherine patiently demonstrate a complex stitching technique to Abigail. "Perhaps one day you'll have a whole shop full of apprentices." "One is plenty for now," Catherine laughed, "but it has been wonderful having help." The shop has never been busier. It was true. Catherine's business had seen an unexpected upturn since her return to Rawhide, whether from sympathy, curiosity, or genuine appreciation of her skills. Women from town and surrounding ranches were bringing in more work than she'd ever had before. "Perhaps being shot was good for business," she joked, then sobered at Elijah's pained expression. "I'm sorry, that was in poor taste." He took her hands, careful of her still tender shoulder. "Don't apologize for finding humor even in difficult circumstances. It's one of the things I love about you. I still have nightmares sometimes about that day, about not reaching you in time." Catherine leaned forward to kiss him gently. "But you did reach me in time. You saved my life, Elijah, and now we have a future together because of it." The day before their wedding, Catherine visited her shop for the last time as a single woman. Though she would continue working there after marriage, it felt symbolically significant, the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. As she tidied her work table, the bell above the door jangled. Looking up, Catherine was surprised to see Mrs. Jenkins from the way station, dressed in her Sunday best. "Mrs. Jenkins, what brings you to Rawhide?" the older woman beamed. "Why, your wedding, of course. Did you think I'd miss it after playing a small part in your love story?" She set a package wrapped in brown paper on the counter. "A little something for the bride." Catherine unwrapped it to find a beautiful hand-pieced quilt in shades of blue and cream. "Oh, Mrs. Jenkins, it's exquisite." "Every bride needs a marriage quilt," Mrs. Jenkins said matter-of-factly. 30 years ago, the women in my community made one for Harold and me. I've been working on yours since you and Mr. Wright stayed at my station." Catherine embraced the older woman, deeply touched by the gesture. "Thank you. It will have a place of honor in our new home." The wedding took place on a perfect autumn day, with leaves turning gold and crimson against a sky of deepest blue. Catherine had chosen to hold the ceremony in the small church, where she'd first noticed Elijah all those months ago, with a reception to follow in the town hall. Her wedding dress, created with Abigail's assistance, was an elegant creation of ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. As she stood before the mirror in her rooms above the shop, Catherine hardly recognized the confident, glowing woman who gazed back at her. "You look beautiful, Miss Adams," Abigail said, adjusting the small wreath of autumn flowers in Catherine's upswept hair. "Uncle Elijah won't know what hit him." Catherine smiled at the young woman who had quickly become both assistant and friend. "Thank you, Abigail, for everything." A knock at the door announced the arrival of Sheriff Porter, who had agreed to walk Catherine down the aisle in the absence of any family. "Ready, Miss Adams?" he asked, offering his arm with unexpected gallantry. "Though I reckon I won't be calling you that much longer." "I'm ready," Catherine confirmed, a sense of absolute certainty filling her heart. The church was filled with townspeople. All turned to watch as Catherine walked down the aisle toward Elijah, who stood waiting with the minister. His face when he saw her was a picture of awe and devotion that Catherine knew she would remember all her days. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion. They had written their own vows, simple but heartfelt promises that acknowledged their unusual beginning while looking toward their shared future. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Elijah's kiss was both tender and reverent, drawing appreciative sighs from the assembled guests. The reception that followed was joyous, with music, dancing, and more food than the small town had seen at one gathering in years. Everyone, it seemed, had contributed something to celebrate the union of the brave dressmaker and the heroic rancher whose love story had captured Rawhide's collective imagination. As the afternoon waned toward evening, Elijah drew Catherine aside for a moment of relative privacy. "Happy, Mrs. Wright," the new name sent a thrill through Catherine. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she assured him. "And you? I keep thinking I'll wake up and find this has all been a dream," Elijah confessed, his arms encircling her waist. "That I'm still that solitary rancher with nothing but cattle and open sky for company." Catherine reached up to touch his face. "Not a dream, and never solitary again, I promise you." After the celebration concluded, they traveled by buggy to Elijah's ranch house, which would serve as their temporary home until their new house in town was completed. As he carried her over the threshold carefully, mindful of her still healing shoulder, Catherine felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. "Welcome home, Catherine Wright," Elijah said, setting her gently on her feet in the small but cozy main room. "Home," Catherine repeated, savoring the word. After years of feeling adrift, she had found her harbor at last. Later that night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, Catherine traced lazy patterns on Elijah's chest. "You ever think about how strange it is? That something so terrible could lead to something so wonderful." Elijah caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. "I've thought about it a great deal. How different our lives might have been if Holloway hadn't done what he did that day. We might never have spoken more than polite greetings in passing," Catherine mused. "Two people living separate lives in the same small town, never knowing what might have been." "I'd like to think we would have found our way to each other eventually," Elijah said. "But I'm grateful selfishly, perhaps, that we didn't have to wait any longer than we did." Catherine propped herself up on her elbow to look at her husband in the moonlight filtering through the curtains. "Not selfishly. I feel the same way. The circumstances were terrible, but the outcome—" She smiled. "The outcome has been more wonderful than anything I could have imagined." Elijah pulled her closer, his kiss a promise of all the days and nights to come. "Just the beginning, Catherine, just the beginning." 3 years later, Catherine sat on the wide front porch of their home at the edge of Rawhide, watching as Elijah showed their son, James, how to whittle a small wooden horse. At 18 months, James was too young to handle a knife himself, but he watched his father's movements with solemn concentration, his chubby hands reaching occasionally to touch the emerging shape. The house Elijah had built for them stood as a testament to his promise, spacious enough for their growing family, with a separate workshop attached to the main building where Catherine could meet clients without them traipsing through the family home. Her business had flourished beyond expectation, with Abigail now a full partner in what had become Adams and Wright Fine Dressmaking. The scar on Catherine's shoulder had faded to a pale line, aching occasionally before rain, but otherwise causing little trouble. The emotional scars had healed too, with time and love working their quiet magic. "Mama, look," James called, holding up the small wooden horse Elijah had completed. "Horse?" "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Catherine said, accepting the toy as her son clambered onto her lap. She glanced up at Elijah with a smile. "You have a talented father." "Talented at some things," Elijah demurred, settling beside them on the porch swing. His hand moved almost unconsciously to rest on Catherine's rounded belly, where their second child was making its presence known with enthusiastic kicks. "How are you feeling?" he asked, the concern in his eyes reminding Catherine of those first days in Silver Creek when he'd barely left her side. "Wonderful," she assured him, covering his hand with her own. "Dr. Miller says everything is progressing perfectly." Elijah's relief was palpable. Though James's birth had been straightforward, the memory of almost losing Catherine to Holloway's bullet still haunted him enough to make him particularly protective during her pregnancies. "Good," he said simply, then grinned as the baby delivered a particularly vigorous kick against his palm. "This one's going to be a handful." "Like father, like child," Catherine teased. "Remember last winter when you insisted on riding out during that blizzard to check on the stranded Hendersons?" "That was different," Elijah protested. "They had children with them, and their wagon had broken an axle." Catherine shook her head fondly. "Always the hero, Elijah Wright." He looked suddenly serious. "Not a hero, just a man who couldn't stand by when help was needed." "My hero," Catherine corrected softly, leaning in to kiss him. Their moment was interrupted by James squirming to be let down, eager to return to his toys scattered across the porch. As Catherine watched him play, she reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought her to this moment of perfect contentment. Rawhide had become truly home now, in a way it hadn't been before the shooting. The town had rallied around her then and continued to embrace her as she built a life with Elijah. Thomas Holloway was a distant memory, serving his sentence far away in Carson City. "Penny for your thoughts?" Elijah asked, his arm settling comfortably around her shoulders. Catherine leaned into his embrace. "I was just thinking about how fortunate we are. This home, our son, the new baby coming. Sometimes it feels almost too good to be true." "Not too good," Elijah corrected. "Just good enough." Exactly what we deserve after that rocky start. The sun was setting over the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. In the distance, the lights of Rawhide were beginning to twinkle as businesses closed and families gathered for evening meals. Catherine thought of the desperate ride that had brought them to this point, 20 miles through rugged terrain, her life hanging by a thread, sustained by the determination of the man who now sat beside her as her husband and the father of her children. "I love you, Elijah Wright," she said simply, "more with each passing day." His kiss was as tender as the first they'd shared, yet deepened by the years of shared joys and challenges. "And I love you, Catherine Wright, from that first desperate day until my last breath and beyond." As darkness settled over the Nevada landscape, the small family remained on their porch, surrounded by the quiet blessings of a life built together one day, one choice, one act of courage at a time.